Lonely rancher bought a native woman who can't obey. Unaware she would be the love of his life. The heat inside the copper spur was thick enough to choke on whiskey fumes, dust, and the stench of men who hadn't washed since spring. Laughter cracked through the noise as a girl was dragged into the lamplight, wrists bound, chin unbowed. Her skin caught the glow like hammered bronze. Her eyes, dark and sharp, belonged to a creature that had forgotten how to kneel. Hank Crow slammed his palm on the table, the sound sharp as a gunshot. "This one's wild," he jeered. "Can't cook, can't obey. Who's man enough to tame her?" From the corner, a man rose slowly, lean, sunburned, walking with a limp that spoke of wars long gone. Beckett Hale tossed a silver pouch onto the table. "I'll take her," Crow sneered. To teach her manners, Beckett's voice was steady. "No, to let her walk free." The room fell silent, and Ayla Tsinni lifted her head. Tularosa Basin lay beneath a sky so white it hurt to look at. The desert stretched endless fields of gypsum sand gleaming like snow, the air shivering with heat. Wind hissed through dry yucca, and somewhere far off, thunder grumbled but never came. Out here, mercy had a way of losing its way before reaching the ground. Beckett Hale's ranch sat at the basin's edge, a cluster of weathered boards and fences bleached gray by sun and silence. He lived alone among his horses, his limp the ghost of a bullet from the Mescalero campaign. Once, his name had been called by generals, now only the wind called it, whistling through broken rails. Each dawn he saddled the same roan gelding, fed the same fire, spoke to no one. He carried quiet like armor. That day, he returned from Red Hollow with more than supplies. Ayla Tsinni followed him on foot, her hands unbound, her eyes measuring the open land. She was young, mid-20s, maybe, but the way she moved was cautious, practiced. Her braids were dark with dust, her shoulders straight despite the thinness of her frame. The copper light caught the faint scars around her wrists, relics of rope, not defeat. When Beckett dismounted, he didn't offer words, only pointed toward the well. She understood, without asking. She drew water, drank once, then poured the rest over her head. Steam rose from her hair in the killing heat. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of leather and smoke. One bed, one table, a pair of worn boots by the door. Ayla stood at the threshold, unsure if this was shelter or another cage. Beckett limped past her, set his hat on a peg, and said quietly, "You can sleep inside, or not. Door stays open either way." That night, she didn't touch the bed. She sat on the porch with her back to the post, knife resting on her thigh. Coyotes called from the dunes. The oil lamp in the window burned low. Beckett didn't blow it out, just left it glowing. A soft, steady thing in a world that had forgotten gentleness. Before dawn, she was still there, eyes fixed on the horizon. When he stepped out with coffee in hand, their gazes met, not warm, not hostile, just two souls trying to remember what safety felt like. He said, "If you're staying, there's work needs doing." She nodded once. "Then I'll do it." The sun climbed, spilling white fire across the basin, and for the first time in a long while. Beckett Hale wasn't the only living thing moving toward the day. The first morning burned hot enough to blur the fence line. Ayla's figure moved through the haze, light but sure, her steps soundless on the dust. She pulled water from the well, her palms raw from the rope, and filled the trough until the horses came nosing close. Beckett watched from the barn doorway, coffee in hand, the brim of his hat shadowing a face carved by sun and quiet regret. He didn't speak. She didn't ask. The rhythm of the desert filled the spaces words would have wasted. When she finished, Ayla gathered a torn bridle from the rail and examined it. The leather had dried and split neglect. Not time. She found a strip of hide near the saddle rack and began to mend it with calm precision. Beckett stepped forward, slow from his bad leg, and set a pair of small gloves beside her. "If you're gonna fix tack," he said, "might as well keep your hands whole." She glanced at the gloves, soft doeskin, clearly used, and then up at him. "They'll fit a smaller man," she said simply. "Then they'll stretch," he answered, for a heartbeat. The wind carried nothing but the creak of boards and the distant rustle of mesquite. Ayla slipped the gloves on, flexed her fingers, and kept stitching. Beckett turned back toward the corral, his limp more noticeable when he moved fast. By midday, the air shimmered white, thick with the hum of flies. Beckett's roan kicked a rail loose, and he stooped to nail it back, but his balance failed him halfway down. Ayla caught the hammer before it hit the dirt, crouching beside him. "Your leg," she said. "Doesn't like remembering," he muttered. Her brow tightened, not in pity, but understanding. "Where I come from, we honor the wounds that let us keep walking." He looked at her, then really looked, and something shifted in the air, quiet and unsure. Not tenderness, not yet, but the first hint that she wasn't the enemy of his solitude. Later, as dusk painted the sky in copper and ash, Ayla cooked in silence. The scent of beans and roasted chili mingled with cedar smoke. Beckett sat on the porch, mending his saddle strap by the lantern's glow. When she set the tin plate beside him, he hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," she interrupted, lowering herself to the step opposite. "But I eat too. Fair's fair." The coyotes began again, their cries cutting through the distance. Beckett chewed slowly, watching the lamp flicker between them. "You planning to stay long?" he asked. "Long enough to earn the food I took." He gave a short nod, almost a smile. "Reckon the place could use another pair of hands?" For the first time. She met his eyes without the barrier of suspicion. The night pressed close around them, but neither moved away. By the time the stars came out, the silence between them had changed, no longer edged with fear, but with something that might one day turn into trust. The days bled together beneath the white sun of Tularosa. Work began before dawn and ended only when the desert cooled enough for breath. Beckett mended fences, Ayla gathered feed, fetched water, and calmed the horses when thunder rumbled on the horizon. Neither spoke much, but the silence no longer felt sharp. It had changed shape, less a wall, more a kind of peace. At first, Beckett watched her with a soldier's caution. She moved like a shadow, her steps deliberate, her eyes scanning every open stretch of land before she crossed it. Sometimes he'd catch her gazing north, toward the Oregon mountains, her expression distant and unreadable. He wondered if she saw graves there, or memories. When she worked, she did it with precision, not obedience. She never waited for instruction. If the rope was frayed, she replaced it. If the trough leaked, she patched it. Beckett had lived long enough among men who took orders. He didn't know what to do with someone who simply understood what needed doing. One morning he found her kneeling by the corral, running her hand down the neck of his roan gelding. The horse, mean with strangers, stood perfectly still under her touch. "Never seen him hold still for anyone," Beckett said, leaning on the fence post. Ayla didn't turn. "Horses don't fear what listens." He smiled faintly. "Guess that's why he fears me." Then she glanced up, the corner of her mouth curving not quite a smile, but close enough to make the air feel different. That afternoon, The wind changed. It came hard from the south, carrying the scent of iron and the grit of distant storms. Beckett felt it before he saw it the way old soldiers feel danger. "Tie the barn doors," he called, "and get inside." But Ayla, standing in the corral, saw the youngest mare bolting against the rails, wild-eyed. Without hesitation, she ran toward it. The sky turned orange, dust boiling up from the basin floor. Beckett shouted her name too late. The storm hit like a living thing, tearing at the ground. Sand sliced through the air, blinding, howling. Beckett's leg buckled as he struggled toward the barn, hand over his face. He stumbled, hit the dirt hard, the world spinning in yellow light. Through the blur, he saw her Ayla, dragging a panicked horse by the reins, pulling it toward the shelter. Wind whipped her braids straight behind her. When the fence gave way with a crack, she threw herself across him, shielding him from the falling rail. He coughed, tasting blood and sand. "You should have run." Her voice came rough but steady. "My people don't leave anyone in the storm." For a moment, neither moved. Only the roar of the wind filled their ears. Then she pushed herself up, offered him her hand. He took it. The storm screamed around them, but the contact between their palms warm. Alive was the calmest thing in the desert. By nightfall, the basin lay flattened, silent but for the whimper of the wind dying away. The barn roof had held. They sat inside among the horses, faces streaked with dust, sharing a single canteen of water. Beckett studied her in the lamplight. "You saved my fool hide out there." Ayla's eyes softened. The firelight reflected in them. "And you bought mine in a saloon. Maybe we're even now. Don't think that's how debts work." She looked away, smiling faintly. "Maybe it's how freedom does." For a long while, neither spoke. Outside, lightning flickered along the mountains. Inside, something small and quiet took root. The following days brought a gentler rhythm. She taught him to listen to the wind the way it changed pitch before rain. He taught her to read words off the old ledger he kept for the horses. In the evenings, they sat on opposite ends of the porch, watching the sun drop behind the dunes. "Once," she said softly, "in my tongue, Tsinni means fire that walks slow. My father gave it to me because he said slow fire burns longest." Beckett nodded, gaze on the horizon. He was right. Their eyes met for a heartbeat longer than before. By the week's end, the desert bloomed in brief green. The wind carried the scent of wet clay, the first hint of reprieve after endless heat. Beckett found himself looking for her silhouette each morning, the way he once looked for sunrise. When she caught him watching, she didn't look away. And in that stillness between a man who'd forgotten how to forgive and a woman who refused to bow, something unspoken began to take shape. Fragile and undeniable as the first flower after rain. Word travels faster than rain in the desert. Within a week, whispers from Red Hollow reached even the far edges of Tularosa Basin. They said Beckett Hale had gone soft keeping a wild Apache girl under his roof. They said she bewitched him, that he'd forgotten which side he belonged to. In a land that fed on suspicion, rumor was the closest thing to fire. Beckett didn't speak of it, but he heard the tone change when he went into town for supplies. Men who once nodded at him now spat in the dust near his boots. A ranch hand at the stable muttered, "You can take the savage out of her cage, but you can't take the wild out of her blood." Beckett's fist clenched, but he said nothing. He had learned long ago that some fights weren't worth winning. When he returned home that evening, Ayla was fixing the fence line, sweat streaking the dust on her skin. The moment he dismounted, she looked up and read everything in his face. "They're talking again," she said quietly. He nodded. "Let them." But the words were heavier than he made them sound. That night, they ate in silence. Wind pressed against the windows. The lamp trembled. Beckett reached for his ledger, his one link to the world of law and numbers, and found the envelope waiting on the table, stamped with a seal he didn't recognize. He opened it slowly, lips moving as he tried to read the cramped print, his brow furrowed. "Looks official," he murmured. "Bank claim. Says my loan's overdue." Ayla took the paper, scanning it with narrowed eyes. She traced a line with her finger, then another, her voice low but sharp. "This isn't from the Cheyenne Bank. Look wrong, Mark. Wrong signature. They forged it." Before Beckett could answer, a knock slammed against the door. Silas Pritchard stood there, a man with slick hair, polished boots, and a smirk too confident for the desert. Behind him, 2 hired guns leaned on their rifles. "Mr. Hale," Pritchard drawled, "I represent the Territorial Land Office. Seems your claim on this property's expired. But I'm a fair man. You sign this, hand over the deed, and I'll see you're compensated proper." Beckett's jaw worked. "I don't sign anything tonight." Pritchard stepped closer, eyes glinting. "I hear you've been keeping company that makes decent men nervous. Maybe I should talk to the marshal instead." The room tensed. Ayla stood in the shadow near the hearth, silent as stone. Beckett's hand brushed his belt. No gun. He'd left it on the porch rail. Pritchard tossed the paper on the table. "Suit yourself. Soldier, tomorrow. I'll come back with law on my side." As he turned, Ayla's voice cut through the air. "You're lying." Pritchard froze. "What did you say?" She stepped forward, the lamplight catching the curve of her cheekbone, her eyes cold as obsidian. "The stamp is wrong. The seal is wrong. And the law does not walk with men who hide behind fear." The hired men shifted uneasily. Pritchard laughed a hard, brittle sound and reached for his revolver. It never cleared the holster. A flash of silver cut the air. Her knife small, carved bone handle spun once, slicing the back of his hand. The gun clattered to the floor. Pritchard howled, clutching the wound, his arrogance leaking out faster than blood. Beckett was on his feet now, between Ayla and the door. "You best leave while you still can." The man stumbled backward into the night, curses trailing like dust. The sound of hooves faded into the dark. Inside, silence held its breath. Beckett turned to her, still half shocked. "You could have killed him." Her tone was steady. "If I wanted to, he'd be dead." He studied her for a long moment, then reached for the knife she'd thrown. He wiped the blood from its edge, handed it back, hilt first. "I thought I'd bought your freedom that night," he said quietly. "Didn't realize you'd come to save mine." Her eyes met his, steady, unreadable. "We saved each other." He exhaled, the weight of years in a single breath. Then he smiled small, genuine, the kind that starts in the eyes. "Guess that makes us even." "Not yet," she murmured. "You still owe me a sunrise that isn't full of dust." Outside, thunder rolled across the basin, heavy and close. Rain hadn't touched that land in months, but now the air carried the taste of change, metallic, alive. That night, Beckett lay awake listening to the storm crawl nearer. Beside the window, Ayla kept watch as she always did, her silhouette framed in flashes of lightning. He realized he wasn't watching a prisoner, nor a guest. He was watching the reason the place finally felt like home. The storm finally broke at dawn, Rain fell like a promise the desert had almost forgotten how to keep thin. Hesitant at first, then steady, washing the white dust from every surface. Beckett stood in the doorway, letting the wind push against him. The smell of wet earth rose, sharp and sweet, mixing with wood smoke and coffee. Ayla came out barefoot, the hem of her skirt soaked dark. She tilted her head back to the sky, eyes closed, rain trailing down her face, for the first time since he'd met her. Beckett saw her without guard or tension, just a woman breathing in peace. "You look like someone who's been waiting a long time for this," he said. She opened her eyes, met his gaze. "We all wait for water, one way or another." He smiled faintly. "Can't argue that." They spent the day repairing what the storm had torn: the fence, the corral, the roof edge. The work came easy. So did the silence between them. When he limped, she steadied him without a word. When she reached for nails, he passed them before she asked. Their movements fit like two parts long meant to find each other. By evening, the air had cooled. The desert glowed silver beneath a sky rinsed clean. Ayla brewed coffee over the fire, the scent mingling with the resin of burning mesquite. Beckett sat nearby, whittling a small piece of cedar into the shape of a horse. The rhythm of knife and flame was gentle, hypnotic. After a while, she spoke quietly. "I used to dream about a house with smoke rising from its roof, not because I wanted to live there, but because it meant someone had a home. That smoke meant warmth." She stirred the coffee, eyes lowered. "Now I wake and see it here. Sometimes I still don't believe it's real." Beckett set the carving down, watching her hands. "You made it real." A pause. "You think that easy? No," he said, voice low. "I think it's brave." The fire cracked softly between them. Outside, frogs began to sing in the shallow pools left by rain, tiny sounds of life returning. After a long silence, Beckett leaned forward. "Ayla, I've done things I don't talk about. During the war, I rode with men who burned villages like yours. I told myself it was duty. Later, I told myself I was only following orders. But truth is," his voice faltered, "I didn't stop it. And I see their faces sometimes when I close my eyes." She looked at him then, her expression unreadable in the flickering light. "You think I haven't dreamed of killing every man who wore blue?" He opened his mouth, but she lifted a hand, stopping him. "I have, many nights, but hate is a thirst that never ends. It drinks you dry until there's nothing left." She stirred the embers with a stick, sparks rising like small stars. "If I keep it, I stay a prisoner, and I am tired of cages." Beckett's throat tightened. "Then how do you let go of it?" "I don't," she said softly. "I walk with it, until it stops walking faster than me." The words hung in the air, heavy and holy. Beckett nodded once, slow, like a man finally understanding something he'd carried for too long. The lamp between them flickered. His shadow reached hers across the floorboards, merging where the light fell weakest. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small book, edges worn, spine cracked. "Ledger's empty now," he murmured. "Guess that means the debt's gone." She smiled faintly. "You still counting things that can't be measured?" He chuckled, the sound rough but real. "Maybe I'm just trying to remember how to live without owing someone." Her eyes softened. "Then stop owing. Just be." A gust of wind blew the door ajar, scattering a few sheets from the table. Ayla knelt to gather them, one page drifting under Beckett's hand. Their fingers brushed. Neither moved away. The contact was simple, but it carried every word they hadn't said. He whispered, "If this land ever feels too small, you can go. You don't owe me a damn thing." She looked up at him, eyes reflecting the flame. "And if I stay," he swallowed hard, "then I'll try not to break what's been mended." A smile ghosted her lips. Then we understand each other. Outside, the night deepened, stars sharp above the wet earth. Beckett poured her a tin cup of coffee. She took it, their hands brushing again. This time, neither pretended it was by accident. They sat side by side on the porch. The rain had ended, leaving the air cool and clean. Coyotes called in the distance, softer now, almost like lullabies. "I used to think peace was a place," he said. "Now I think it's a person." Ayla turned toward him, her eyes steady. "Peace doesn't last forever, but if we keep it alive long enough, it leaves roots behind." He nodded slowly, looking out into the silver basin. "Then let's see if we can make it grow." The wind carried her quiet reply, "We already have." In that moment, nothing else mattered, not the rumors, not the past, not the world that had tried to crush them both. Only the hush of the desert after rain, and the slow, steady heartbeat of two souls learning to breathe in the same silence. By the time the basin dried again, spring had slipped quietly into summer. The grass along the wash turned brittle. The horses flicked flies with slow tails, and the days bled into one another, warm and still. For a while, it seemed the world had made peace with itself. But peace, Beckett knew, had a way of walking off without goodbye. He woke one morning to the sound of emptiness. The kettle cold, the door unlatched. On the table lay a small folded paper, the edges damp from her cup. "Thank you for giving me back my breath." No name, no promise, just that. He stared at it until the words blurred. Then he set the note down beside her knife, the one with the carved bone handle, and walked out into the yard. The air already burned hot. Even the horizon shimmered like molten glass. Her tracks led east, where the sand met the pale line of Dry Creek. He saddled the roan and rode without thinking. Every mile of the basin was a mirror of itself, mesquite, rock, sky, but somehow he knew which way she'd gone. Maybe the wind told him. Maybe it was the silence she left behind that pointed the way. He found her near midday, sitting on the edge of a dry streambed. The sun beat down in blinding sheets. She had tied her hair back, her face streaked with dust. But her eyes were steady as ever. "You ride fast for a man with a bad leg," she said softly, not turning. He dismounted, letting the reins fall. "And you walk far for someone who said she was staying." Her lips curved half smile, half ache. "I stayed long enough to remember who I am. That's more than I thought I could." Beckett took a step closer. "You could have said goodbye. I tried." She nodded toward the note, "But words felt smaller than what I owed you." He looked out across the basin, where heat shimmered like water that wasn't there. "You don't owe me anything. I just—" He broke off, his throat tight. "This place, it doesn't sound right without you in it." Silence again. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, brushed it across her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear and finally faced him. "You gave me a home without bars," she said. "That's more than most men ever offered. But freedom?" She touched her chest, just above her heart. "It doesn't live in one place." Beckett reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a strip of worn leather. It was dark with years of sweat and dust, the end carved with the small sunburst mark he'd made during the war, the same piece he always carried when the world felt too wide. I used to wear this when I thought the fight would keep me alive, he said. Turns out, it just reminded me what I lost. But now, he held it out to her. Now, I think it might mean something better. She stared at it, her fingers brushing the leather, and her voice dropped to a whisper. You offering me chains again? Beckett Hale. His smile was soft, unsure. No, just something to hold if you decide to stay. For a long time, she said nothing. The desert around them hummed with heat. A single cloud drifted across the sun, throwing both of them into the same patch of shade. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but steady. You never asked me to stay. I figured freedom's got to choose for itself. Ayla looked at him a long while, at the man who had bought her freedom, worked beside her, and never once reached for her without her consent. Then she took the strip of leather and tied it loosely around her wrist. I'll stay, she said, but not because you need me. He stepped closer, the faintest smile touching the corner of his mouth. Then why? Because when I'm here, she said. The wind sounds like it remembers my name. He reached out, brushed a raindrop of sweat from her temple, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. Their foreheads touched no kiss, just the quiet of two lives finally finding the same breath. When they rode back to the ranch, the evening light had turned the basin to gold. The land smelled of wet clay and horse sweat, and in the far pasture, the yucca had bloomed white flowers against the scarred red earth. Weeks later, when riders passed that way, they no longer called it Hale Ranch. They called it Wildflower Ridge for the Apache woman who tamed the wind, and the man who learned that love wasn't something to claim, but something to stand beside. At night, when the stars burned hard above the desert, two silhouettes sat on the porch, their voices low, their laughter rare but real. And if you listen close, you could almost hear it, the sound of peace taking root in a place that was never meant to grow anything at all. Out here, under the same sky that watched them find each other, the wind still carries stories of hearts that healed, of courage that didn't need glory. If this tale of Beckett and Ayla stirred something quiet inside you, stay a while longer with us. Each story born from dust and light reminds us that love, like wildflowers, can bloom even in the hardest ground. Come back to the West, where every dawn holds another chance to begin again, and every ending leaves a little hope glowing on the horizon.